Welcome back to Withdraw Consent. I'm Jack. Today we're going to talk about whether or not the Azov Battalion and Brigade or different Ukrainian groups are actually Nazis, which is a claim that has been made by a lot of people who oppose the Ukrainian war. It's also been claimed by Putin. And this is an opinion related one, so you might come to a different conclusion than I do. My opinion is that they are not, because they're not National Socialists and they're not pursuing National Socialists. National Socialism is a form of government, I'll say. They are adjacent, though. They're similar. And so I'm going to go into this. Now, Vladimir Putin makes the claim that his goal in eastern Ukraine is denazification. And when he makes that claim, he's kind of telling the truth in a way which we'll see from the facts. But then he paints with a broad brush and he kind of invalidates his claim by claiming that everybody who's anti-Russian in Ukraine is a Nazi. And so he goes too far in that. I also think that, like, in the end, when Western media, whether mainstream or like a Tim Blue or something, says there's Nazis in Ukraine, kind of it's the one time since George Lincoln Rockwell and the American Nazi Party that they're kind of telling the most truth. And then every other time they sling that word around, it's just going to be completely false, of course, you know? And so basically, let's talk about the history of how this came about. So prior to 2014, you had these kind of gangs of the people who are now called Nazis. And so they're very far right wing and they're militant, and they didn't have institutional power at all, though. And they fought against communism, Antifa, different stuff like that. So Yanukovych was in charge of the country back then, and he was trying to make deals with the European Union. In 2013, the bottom fell out and he stopped negotiating with them. That caused he looked like he was going to move towards Russia, so as more of an ally. And so that caused the Euromaidan protests of 2013. Then in 2014, the U.S. backed a coup there with the Maidan Revolution. And after that, Poroshenko became the president. There was an interim guy, but that doesn't really count. And then Poroshenko from 2014 to 2019, then Zelensky from 2019 till present at the filming of this video. So what happened is at 2014, when the government changed, all of these far right-wing gangs, the people who they now call Nazis, gained institutional power. Before that, they had none. But then after that, after 2014, they got into the police forces, they got into lower levels of government. The Azov Brigade or Battalion, whichever way you want to say it, was actually made part of the National Guard, the Ukrainian National Guard. And so from that point on, they're not looked at by the establishment of Ukraine as fringe groups. They're looked at as mainstream groups. And so they got some objectives, and so some of the objectives are discrimination against minority groups, but not just because they're minority groups, for specific reasons. So, like, there was a meeting of 10 of these groups, and they decided to target the LGBT community. So they went and did a raid on a LGBT nightclub in Kyiv. And like, they also said the Veterans for Cannabis was their enemy because they're anti-drugs and stuff like that. So you could call that adjacent to National Socialism if you want to. The problem is that those things can be done for a variety of reasons by a variety of people that you're not going to call them Nazis. Just because you target a specific group, that you don't want this thing, like, say, a form of degeneracy, and whatever it is. Say take something extreme like the stuff with children, and you say you want to target those people and you want to imprison, incarcerate, get them out of your country, or whatever. Does that make you a Nazi? And the answer is no, clearly. Now okay, well, before we go to the big one, they also do a lot of kids groups where they do, and they're very militant. So they do all types of programs for children, from English literacy, poetry, to knife fighting practice and stuff like that. And so basically, the claim is that it's kind of like the Hitler Youth. But we saw recently when we did the episode on India that Modi's party in India also has a big youth movement in the political party that they try to help these kids, bring them up, and then kind of militant, and then they also do the propaganda with them. So what I'm saying is that the far right people in Ukraine do this doesn't necessarily make them Nazis, because nobody claims that Modi's people are Nazis. To my knowledge, I've not heard that slung about. You could take these things, that there's enough of these things that you could call them Nazis if you want to. Now, the main thing that they have is de-Russification of the Donbass region is one of their main goals. So they want to make Ukrainian more Ukrainian. Now, okay, so when you look back to National Socialism, they wanted Germany for Germans. What they wanted really was kind of similar to what I want, self-determination for their people. That's what they wanted. And there were people outside of their borders who were Germans who weren't allowed to have self-determination. Like in the Free City of Danzig, they voted to go to Germany, but that wasn't allowed by the Polish government, of course, because that was their only seaport, and they would be landlocked if not for that. So in this case, though, it doesn't fit, though. If you call the Ukrainians Nazis because of the de-Russification of the Donbass region, which is why Putin is calling them Nazis, because the conflict is de-Russification, the parallel to Nazis doesn't fit, though, because the problem is if the eastern part of your country is inhabited by majority ethnic Russians who desire to speak Russian in their politics, go to a Russian Orthodox church and all of this, the Ukrainians are not fighting for the self-determination of their people. They're fighting to deny the self-determination of the Russian inhabitants of Ukraine who live in the eastern portion, the Donbass region. So the parallel doesn't really fit there. In my opinion, one of the important parts of the claim that there's a Nazi problem there is basically that since 2014, the Minister of the Department of the Interior of Ukraine has provided funding for these groups. So they're doing these organizing, even down to the English literacy and the poetry and the knife fighting stuff that I was talking about. But those are in buildings paid by the Ukrainian government. So it's kind of a part of their government, and that they have substantial political power, but they're not in control of the government. Now, the greatest, in my opinion, the greatest claim that these guys could be Nazis is that they have so much power that there's a potential that they could take fascist control of the democratic government, even though they're not running elections there right now. But that's the part of the claim that sounds the most legitimate to me. So this is what I think. I think that they're just that they're not promoting National Socialism. So that's the metric that I use to say, hey, can you call them Nazis or not? Now, is it fair when Putin does? Partially so, partially not, because he paints with too broad of a brush. And that's why I think that it's okay if like a Tim Pool or a mainstream media were to say that there were Nazis there, because it's kind of true, but it's not fully true in my opinion, because I have a high bar for what is and what is not. You even look at stuff like, they did this thing where in 2012 they passed a law, and the law was friendly to the Russians who lived in Ukraine. And it kind of said you could use Russian language in your politics and in your media, in Ukrainian media and stuff like that in their regions. And basically they reversed that law, and they didn't outlaw it completely, using Russian in politics and media, but they did restrict it heavily. And when you look at that, and then you also look at Donald Trump signed an executive order making English the primary language of the United States, which should be a given. But basically, when you look at Ukraine and the de-Russification, and you try to say that that's a Nazi thing, well, then is Trump then a Nazi for making English the first language of the United States, which should be a given because all the founding fathers spoke and wrote the founding documents in English. So it's kind of a given. But does that make him a Nazi? My answer is no to that, obviously. And I talked to Victor about this, and he made the point, like, I don't want to say anything too mean, but like, what if I joined a black gang of Bloods or Crips, and then I supported BLM and sagged my pants and listened to rap and stuff like that, but none of that stuff makes me a black guy. It doesn't. I could be adjacent to and kind of looking like one, and there's a word for that, but it wouldn't turn me into a black guy. And so, in my opinion, the things they're doing does not make them Nazis. Now, if they had a fascist takeover of the government and they brought in National Socialism, then I would, Nazis. That's what I would say, you know. Anyways, that's what I got for you. I think it was interesting to go into. It's not a conclusive thing, in my opinion, but it's interesting to know about. I'm interested in hearing your opinion in the comments if you think that I'm off base and they just really are Nazis. And that's what I got for you. Hope you guys have a great weekend.